I'm here to give a little bit of background on our study, which is a randomized controlled trial in 5 districts across the nation that's funded by the Wallace Foundation. And I'm going to give an overview of the study, the programs themselves, what they share in common, and their differences. I'm going to discuss our near-term findings, and these are findings as of the fall of 2013, so after the first summer of the program. And then I'm going to talk about what are the implications of our findings for providers, and also a little bit for funders as well. So we all know that it's important to understand the effects of summer learning programs. There's evidence in the research base that summer learning loss occurs, particularly for students in poverty. And prior research has established that there are some programs that are effective in improving academic outcomes, but not all. So there's a lot known about mandatory summer programs and very small, niche, not scaled programs as well, and some also reading at home programs. But very little is known about the effects of large-scale voluntary summer programs, the extent to which Ron talked about the scale in Boston, and we also see it in these other districts. And we don't know a lot about cumulative years of progress. So if kids go for year after year after year into summer programs, what is the effects of this? And this is National Summer Learning Study is intended to answer these questions and these holes in the literature. So the study is rather unique. It's national in scope. So Boston, of course, is one of the cities involved in this effort, along with Dallas, Duval County, which is in Florida in the Jacksonville area, Pittsburgh, and Rochester. Now, this study started out actually in 2011 with 2 years of formative study. So I know a lot of friendly faces who have put up with us for 4 summers of study. And then we started the outcome study, this randomized controlled trial that I'll tell you a little bit about in summer of 2013. So in spring of 2013, all the districts recruited 3rd grade students for the opportunity to participate in 2 years of voluntary summer programs that are run by urban districts and community partners. This study examines academic achievement, social and emotional competencies, and then we'll also be looking at some school year outcomes, including behavior and attendance. And it's also unique because it has collected a very rich set of data on program implementation, which we're able to link to outcomes as well. Now, these district programs all share some core characteristics. First of all, they're voluntary. They're full-day programs, so they run sort of the entire day. They are offered 5 days a week for no less than 5 weeks during the summer. They offer at least 3 hours of instruction in language arts and mathematics each day, and then the rest of the day is devoted to enrichment activities. They all have small class sizes of no more than 15 students per class, and they are free of charge for families and include transportation and meals. So across all of the districts, these are the core components. But they also have really unique attributes. And those attributes can differ sort of across the districts and even within a district itself in terms of the type of enrichment offered. So for instance, in Boston, that varies by site because they each have a unique community partner. So kids who went to a tenacity program did tennis in the afternoon. And if they were at Hale Reservation, they were hiking around, canoeing and swimming. The districts each selected their own curriculum for ELA and mathematics. So that's not common across the districts, although they all had a common curriculum. And I should have mentioned that all the instruction was provided by certified teachers from the district. They also vary in terms of the organization of the day. Some of them offered sort of like the academics in the morning, enrichment in the afternoon, and others of them sort of mixed it up. So kids would rotate from go to a reading class and go on a nature hike, come back for math, have lunch, and things were more fluid during the day. And then the timing during the summer also differed. So some started immediately after the summer started, others waited a couple weeks. And then I would say also that Boston is unique in its intentional focus on social and emotional development, and Ron mentioned that as well. And while all the other districts had this grand goal of improving social and emotional outcomes for kids, none of them did anything intentional to ensure that their programs would actually develop those capacities within students. So all in all, this study is really unique in that it examines a proof of concept about voluntary programming for low-income students. And that's part of its power, sort of its national in scope. It spans 5 districts. It's not studying the effectiveness of a very specific curriculum in a very specific place. It's really about this concept of offering voluntary summer learning programs to our students. Okay? So these are just an overview of the Boston Summer Learning Project National Study Site. So you know that there are a lot more grade levels involved in the SLP in general in Boston, but this study focused on sort of, at this point in 2013, students rising into 4th grade, 3 to 4 students. But from the time that we started working in Boston, you'll see a growth in the number of feeder schools, the number of nonprofits involved in this, the number of sites at which programs are offered, and the number of students. All right, so now just a little bit about the study methods that we use. So we have a randomized controlled trial here. And so one of the nice things about a randomized controlled trial is that it provides the most rigorous set of evidence available because we are able to randomize students who all went in to attend the program. And thus, we don't have any unobserved bias in the 2 groups. So in spring 2013, students were invited to apply. All the students who were invited to apply, they were randomized into 2 groups. Some of them received the summer learning program, right? There's our kids that we call the treatment group. And others did sort of business as usual during the summer. They didn't get in, we call them the control group. And then sort of at the end of the day, we're able to compare the outcomes of those 2 groups and to say with confidence that it is because of the summer learning program that we see those differences. And it's that randomization that makes that possible. Now, the study also, because this study is really aimed in terms, I talked about the proof of concept, and it's developed that way because the goal of this is to provide advice to policymakers across the nation. And so as a result, not only do we use the randomized controlled trial, which provides sort of this very rigorous set of evidence, but we also do things like we have very high standards for statistical significance, including using statistical procedures to avoid finding false positive results due to the number of hypotheses that we test. So highly rigorous in terms of the outcome study. Now this is just to give you a little bit of an idea of what kids are in the study. And so you'll see that the vast majority of them are low-income students, and they're non-white. And so the reason why you'll see the NA for eligible for free and reduced lunch in Boston is because in Boston there's a universal free and reduced price lunch, and those data aren't necessarily tracked. And you'll see that about 42% of our sample are scored at the lowest level in ELA or mathematics, and that's a little bit lower at a quarter in Boston. All right, so I talked a little bit about the value of this study, but really one of the other unique things is that this extends over time, right? So I'm going to talk about results that come out of fall 2013 after the kids went through this first summer, but they went through another summer of programming in summer 2014. We're collecting fall outcomes then too. We're also looking at school year outcomes, and so we're going to have a series of findings that are going to emerge over time. And by 2016, after all the outcomes are analyzed, district leaders and funders are going to have a lot more information about whether voluntary summer learning programs can attract and retain large numbers of students, whether those programs have near and long-term impacts on summer learning outcomes, the operational features that are needed to make those programs effective, and then we'll also have data about the cost effectiveness of this. All right. I talked a little bit about the rich set of implementation data that we have, and I'm going to reuse these data and we link it to our outcome data in the study. And so as part of the study, RAND observed every classroom of students in each of the districts for an entire day. And so that yielded about 800 observations over the course of each summer. We also surveyed classroom teachers who taught the students, and we interviewed site leaders, teachers, and coaches. All right, so the near-term results that I'm going to talk about today are based on how students did soon after the programs ended. So the measures that we use are, we administered a generalized mathematics and reading knowledge assessment in the fall of 2013. between like the 3rd and 5th week of school. And we use it's a Pearson product called the GRADE for the reading assessment, and the GMAID is the math assessment. We also administered the DESA, which is ask teachers to fill out a survey on each student. So each student in the control group or the treatment group, their teacher of record received a survey, and they filled it out. Then these questions asked them to rate social and emotional competencies of their students. And the reason why we survey teachers is because at this age, kids are not necessarily reliable survey takers, particularly on questions where we ask them Likert scale. We want them to rate on a scale. So we are asking their teachers to rate them on their social and emotional competencies. And a lot of those have to do with self-regulation, self-perception, and the like. And then our analyses compare scores of students who are admitted into the program, our treatment group, to those students who are not, who are a control group. And we were able to say that those differences are due to the summer program opportunities. All right, so what did we find? One of the most interesting things that we found is that these programs offered students summer opportunities they otherwise would not have had. Okay, so when we administered the GRADE and the GMAID, we gave kids a really short 4-question survey that asked them what they did over the summer and whether they participated in any activities. 58% of the study control students reported not attending any type of summer program in 2013. And that's across all of the districts. And these were all students who they and their parents had signed them up to take part in these programs. Now this number is substantially lower, that percentage is substantially lower in Boston. You'll see it's 37% in Boston. And that's due in part to the fact that Boston offered a recreational scholarship to all students who were in the control group. So they were given a voucher to attend another program for a couple of weeks. And about 24% of those students who were offered scholarships did use it in the summer of 2013. Okay, so these programs, they have demand and they're continuing to fill a need. All right. Ron alluded to the attendance rates in Boston, and this slide will help go into that. Okay. So in terms of attendance in these programs, we look at a few things. One you'll see on that second column is the no-show rate. Now these are all students who applied to the program, got in, but didn't show up on day one. They didn't show up for one day of the program. And you'll see that that percentage really varies across district. And it's relatively low in Boston, particularly when you compare it to like a high of almost 1/3 of the kids in Duval. So almost for any program that you have during the summer, there are going to be kids who sign up, but circumstances are going to change despite even when people have really good efforts in communication, and they won't show up. Then we start looking at sort of the average daily attendance rate. For kids who attended at least one day, how frequently did they attend? Now in Boston, you'll see that's 80%. So a typical kid in Boston Summer Learning Program attended 80% of the days, which is relatively high. We also looked at sort of like who's really attached, who's a really high attender. These are kids who attended 85% or more of the days. You'll see that number is 60%, that percentage is 60% in Boston. And then we also want to look at like who comes, tries the program, is like, I'm out, right? Like I'm not coming back, I'm done. Because that's another good indicator of sort of attachment and the quality of programming. And you'll see that that percentage is relatively low in Boston at 4%. In comparison to Dallas, which had the highest percentage of that. And in Dallas, it's interesting because when we interviewed teachers, they tended to say that there was a lot of confusion about what the program was about. So they sold it kind of as this camp-like experience, but the program itself is very similar to the mandatory school program with enrichment activities. And so there was a lot of confusion about sort of the intent of that, which could be related to those high percentages of kids who sort of tried it out and didn't want to come back. All right, so Ron kind of went through the results a little bit, but I'll reiterate them again. So what we found is in fall 2013, treatment students came back in the fall, having performed significantly better than control students in mathematics. Every district contributed to this overall effect. And we consider the difference between the control group and the treatment group to be a meaningful advantage that they had at the beginning of fall. And then what's going to be interesting is that our analyses that we're conducting now, we're going to be able to say whether that effect persists throughout the school year as well. All right. He also alluded to the fact that we did not find significant differences between treatment group and control group students in the reading test, which was surprising to some people, particularly since the summer loss literature indicates that for high poverty students that summer learning loss is greater than their higher income peers. We have a few hypotheses about why we don't find any effects in reading at this point. The first has to do with the skills that kids are trying to learn. So these are students who are in 3rd grade going into 4th grade. The programs are focusing primarily on reading comprehension is what kids are doing. They're not learning to read, they're not learning to decode. They're actually learning to comprehend text and to apply their knowledge of it. And that's a really difficult skill to improve and measure. There's a lot of literature around this, and I know that when we went out to each of the districts, they also talked about their own school year struggles in this area as well, that they see that during the school year, even with a much longer period of time, it's difficult to move these reading comprehension measures. It could also be that control group students didn't lose ground in reading, right? Maybe they were all reading at home. We do know that kids read at similar rates at home between our treatment and control group. And so we don't actually have a measure of loss in this study, so we don't know if kids are losing ground or not. So that's another hypothesis. And the other one could be that overall instructional quality was not sufficient. All right. Now, across all of the districts, we also saw that treatment students did not perform better than their control group counterparts on the DEXA, our measure of social and emotional competence. But as Ron alluded to, Boston's estimate is higher than any other district's estimate. The other districts are basically at 0. And Boston their estimate is basically in line with what we're seeing in mathematics in terms of the magnitude of it. It does fall shy of statistical significance on its own. The study's not powered to find effects at the district level. So it's going to be interesting. So we know that Boston is the only district to be intentional in this area. So we think that there may actually be something there. We have a theoretical basis to think that that estimate may actually mean something, that it's not just noise. And then we'll know more because we had that second summer of programming, and we'll be able to look again at the differences between the treatment group and the control group from fall 2014 to be able to see if this persists, and we'll be able to say a lot more about this over time. Now the first one was for that mathematics. Attendance and dosage were related to higher treatment effects. So sort of at 13 days, we see a boost for kids in mathematics, and it's even greater at 22 days. So those sort of have the biggest treatment effects. And same thing with the hours of instruction. We see steady increases. With kids, once they hit like 26 hours of instruction, they have even the greatest effects. All right. So for mathematics, these ideas of like attendance and dosage, getting opportunities for practice seem to be what mattered the most. And the mathematics outcomes were sort of, kids did well on it, irrespective of our measures of instructional quality. However, for reading, what we found were that aspects of quality were positively correlated with our reading outcomes. So for reading, unlike math, the dosage and the attendance, you see slow upticks, but sort of nothing big there. That wasn't sort of what was driving the outcomes. However, aspects of quality were related to those outcomes. So first of all, students who had teachers who had just taught the 3rd or 4th grade. So this is a grade level match for the kids. Those are teachers who know those content standards better than others. Students who received higher quality language arts instruction, and that's based on Grand's observational ratings of that classroom's. And then also students that were in orderly summer sites where the kids had relatively low incidences of misbehavior, where programs had clear procedures and consistent procedures and effective procedures for dealing with student behavior. All right. So altogether, the findings suggest that providers may want to plan programs that run 5 to 6 weeks. If they're interested in academic outcomes, schedule 60 to 90 minutes of math per day. Try to hire the best, most effective qualified teachers with grade level experience as part of that. and to create positive climates that promote student behavior. And funders may want to look for programs with those characteristics as well. And I would say that even for programs that don't desire to have an academic component to it, I would urge them to be intentional about how they're using their time and how they're thinking about developing the skills that they want developed in those programs. And then it also adds some findings from our prior years that suggest that strong implementation depend on this idea of early and comprehensive planning, developing an engaging curriculum that's matched to student abilities and needs, strong hiring practices of teachers, and that includes early hiring of teachers, which I know can be difficult at times. Program structures that maximize time on task for both academics and enrichment. So really ensuring that you have a program that sets all of your instructors up to be really intentional about the time that they have with kids. The time that we have with them in the summer is so short. We're talking about 5-week programs. And even at a full day, it's just not a lot of time. You want to make sure that you're able to sort of maximize that time so that students are learning what you really want them to learn and having the experiences that you really want them to have. And then, of course, strategies for maximizing attendance. And those things can include positive climate, caring teachers, making sure that kids develop a friend in the program, and then also small incentives in some cases, like ice cream parties and things like that. Chris, how am I doing on time?
You're fine.
Yeah, all right. All right, and so this is how everything is going to unfold over time. So what we started in 2013 with actually a report based on those formative feedback results called Getting to Work on Summer Learning that provides advice for program providers. You have in front of you Getting Ready for Fall, which shows the impact of one summer on the fall tests. We're currently producing a report that describes the impact of one summer on the school year. So as of spring 2014, based on one summer of participation, how are students faring? And then in 2016, we're going to get into the really interesting work, which is thinking about the impact of 2 years of summers on student outcomes. And then we'll have another report that will come out describing how to implement high-quality summer programs. And the way we're conceptualizing that at this point is to use a lot of our observation data to be able to really describe what student days are like, and then be able to point to the programmatic decisions that people make that help influence those days, and whether kids are having really good, engaging days, or whether actually it's really a terrible day for a kid.